All right, so welcome to topic 4 of Brainworks Education. So today, our primary focus is civic education, and we're mostly going to focus on human rights. And I want to say from the get-go that human rights are subject to change. They are subject to change based on the moral shift that societies possess over time. So these human rights are not constant, but they are actually subject to change based on the moral landscape and the ethical principles of the individual state and the worldviews that people live in. So society is not a constant. Social sciences are not a constant, but they are rapidly changing, they are rapidly evolving over time. So human rights, like I always said, civic education shouldn't be studied in isolation. So we first started with constitution, then we went to citizenship and talked about characteristics of a citizen. So now we're isolating the individual citizen and talking about their individual rights. So human rights, definitely there are benefits or entitlements or simply claims of freedom an individual has by just virtue of being a human being. It's something that's inherent to all human beings. All human beings, regardless of sex, your color, your religion, age, nationality, or social status, have the same entitlements, which he or she should enjoy in the society which an individual lives in. So despite human rights, the topic of human rights is a little bit controversial. Like I said, it's always subject to change, but it's very important that one knows the fundamentals. If you know the fundamentals, at least you can build on those fundamentals. So I actually found another definition, or at least a better definition of human rights from the United Nations website. So human rights are rights inherent, because this definition actually introduces the terminology that you're supposed to know for your exams. So inherent, the word inherent shouldn't leave your vocabulary in civic education when we're talking about human rights. So human rights are inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human rights include the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, the right to work and education, and many more. Everyone is entitled to these rights without discrimination. So all these rights that have been listed in this definition will be split into 3 categories that we're going to discuss in this lecture, and you have to know all those 3 categories and the characteristics that fall under all those 3 categories, and be able to give relevant examples. Remember, you have to be able to pay attention to details. So as you are studying, you have to really understand, because for social sciences, even just one paragraph or one sentence within that paragraph can actually form a basis for a question in the exam. So you have to be able to pay attention to detail. So we have to know some, we can't separate history. So history is a very important fundamental under any type of social science. So we have to understand and appreciate the history before we look at what's currently happening. And what's currently happening is the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights as a gold standard for countries involved in the UN to uphold certain moral standards in respect for human rights. So human rights have been in existence for a long time, We start off with ancient religious traditions, because you cannot separate human rights from ethical principles and morals, because the human right is what's valuable, what's right. So it's a distinction of right or wrong, ethics and moral principles, but mainly tailored to what's right, dignified to the individual. So you have certain things like in the Christian tradition where you have the golden rule, which shows an element of empathy, fitting into someone else's shoes, do unto others what you would want them to do unto you. And the Hindu, the Quran, the Chinese, the Confucius time periods do have similar mentions, similar quotes in relation to how we are supposed to treat others in relation to our own individual selves. So we're sort of talking about the principle of empathy. So that's where the actually foundation of human rights came from, the principle of empathy, the ability to fit into someone else's shoes and be able to recognize that this person is a human being and we can't treat them in a certain way. So throughout the next definition of historical development of human rights, we're going to be encountering certain words like a charter, dignity, but we first have to be able to appreciate the definition of what a charter is. So a charter is something that is written. So it's a written grant, or you can say it's a written agreement. So it's a written agreement by a sovereign or a legislative power of a country by which a body, such as a city, a company, or a university or a state, is founded, or its rights and privileges are defined. So every time you hear the word charter, think of it as a form of a grant or an agreement where the rights and privileges can be fully recognized and enjoyed. So it's an agreement. So charter and agreement, charter and agreement, charter of this, charter of Monday. You have to know that it's an agreement, a written agreement. All right. So these are the basic documents that we're going to talk about here. And the first document that I want you to focus on is the Magna Carta. So the Magna Carta of 1215. So this is actually a very old document, but these old documents, I want to make known that in as much as they respected human rights, they were sort of generalized towards human rights, but ignored certain civil and social rights. For example, the rights of women were not really recognized, but it was a start. So in as much as these documents are preaching about human rights, they were not inherently perfect. They had a lot of imperfections. No wonder I said human rights, the human rights movement is not something that is constant, but it changes throughout existing generations and millennia. So the Magna Carta of 1215 was the earliest document in the world where human rights were actually recognized. So the Magna Carta, so it just means a great charter, or like I said, the great agreement. So it was a document that was sealed by an English king in 1215, in which he made a series of promises to his subjects and the governing land. Over the course of of centuries, these promises, like how they were supposed to govern and lead their subjects, because this was more of a monarch era. So over the course of the centuries, these promises have required governments in England and in other countries, so they have influenced the tradition to follow the law in dealing with their citizens. There was an interesting charter and an earliest documented proof of human rights, which was in Mali. And Mali was actually a very, very educated country in Africa. Actually, one of the first universities known to man was actually founded in Mali, and it actually has very interesting documents, mathematical manuscripts that cannot be, recognized by mathematical societies because they are actually a little bit advanced. So what I'm saying about Mali is that Mali was actually way advanced for its time, but now because of certain religious and cultural differences, there's a lot of political stability, but back then it was at its prime. So the Charter of Mande of 1222 was the earliest in Africa where human rights were actually guaranteed by Sandiata Keita, King of Mali, who was also known as Mande, which actually translates to the Lion of Mali. So thus he named the document the Charter of Mali, or the Oath of the Charter of Mande, or the Oath of Mande, at his coronation. So coronation is where now you are crowning someone as a sovereign or a chief or a king. This document was written by elders, noblemen, and associations of the country who were commissioned by the king to draw up the principles upon which the Malian Empire should be ruled. So that's the preamble of this document. You have to know what a preamble is. If you do not know, please watch the previous videos. That's the preamble of this document. Stresses on equality of human beings as follows. Every human life is a life. There is no life more ancient or more respectable than another life, as no life is worthier than another life. For this reason, every life being a life, every damage inflicted on a life needs repair. Therefore, nobody may, without reason, oppose his neighbor. Nobody may do his neighbor a wrong. Nobody may torment another human being. So again, this was more tailored towards the idealistic view of human rights as just being tailored towards the right to freedom. So it just isolated the right to freedom as the basic human right. Do unto others what you want them to do unto you. So it's a similar pattern of common sense. The charter also listed certain paragraph mentioning two evils like hunger and slavery, where it says hunger is not a good thing as long as you have a bow and arrow. So the charter literally just wanted to respect human life and made known the two evils of hunger and slavery. But again, both these charters didn't actually put into consideration certain rights, like the rights of women, rights of children, the right of slaves, the previous charter, the British Charter, and persons of certain social, religious, economic, and political groups. So it was mostly tailored towards human rights, generalized human rights. But if it was just after the shock of the World War II, Nazi Germany, where, sometimes bad things lead to good things. So the Holocaust, where thousands of Jews were killed, shocked the world. So because the world was very much horrified, world governments formed what was called back then as an alliance of countries, which was later called the United Nations in 1945, because this mass killing of people in concentration camps was actually very shocking. Therefore, the alliance, later to be called the United Nations, was formed in 1945 to actually promote international peace and law, as well as prevent conflict. So it was a way of making the world better and embracing the spirit of world peace. Has this world peace been recognized? That's subject to debate. They wanted to avoid anyone being unjustly denied life, freedom, food, shelter, and nationality. Therefore, to prevent individuals being abused by their governments, human rights standards were drawn. So I want to make known that this is a reference standard. So the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is a principle standard that all countries should uphold. So it's like a gold standard reference. It's not legally binding to those individual countries because of the principle of sovereignty, but it actually forms a gold standard, a minimal threshold, a reference point that all countries should actually uphold once they sign this agreement of these standards of human treatment. Okay, so like I said, it holds nations accountable for the treatment of its citizens. Thus, the charter was drawn up in 1945. So everywhere where a charter is drawn up, you actually need a way to monitor and evaluate. You need a way to actually enforce, to actually observe, to enforce, to make sure that, all right, this still remains a principle gold standard. And to do that, you need to employ some form of commission. Therefore, the birth of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, just a little after the UN was formed. So after the United Nations member states promised to respect human rights, a commission on human rights was formed to promote this promise, like I earlier stated. The commission was given duty to draft the documents, putting in writing the meaning of fundamental rights and freedom that had been declared in the charter. So the chair of this commission was Eleanor Roosevelt, so the wife to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the then United States of American president. So some of these things that I have highlighted can actually form a basis for some form of MCQs. So the commission came up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted on the 10th December 1948 by the United Nations members. Please know these years. The United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a set of principles by which United Nations members commit, remember, commit, not legally binding, commit themselves to provide all people of their world, or all people of the world with human dignity. So it's about human dignity. They set the minimum standards of how individuals, institutions, and governments should treat people. Human rights empower people to take action when and wherever the standards set are not met, even if the laws of their country or leaders in power do not recognize them. So here it also sets a will to empower citizens of other nations or nations that are involved in the UN to actually act upon or to strike if they've, because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's written and accessible by anyone with access to the internet. So if individual citizens actually find out that the state that we're in is actually a UN country and they've committed to this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but they are not upholding the principles of this declaration as a sovereign state, as citizens, they can form a revolution and do strikes that can be recognized by the world and supported by the world. Then it can lead to certain sanctions being opposed by that country to actually start respecting human rights. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has a preamble that you should know word for word by heart, because it can actually come as an essay or a short one-word answer. So you have to know what it entails. So here the recognition of the inherent, so that's the first word, inherent dignity, and of the equal and inalienable rights of all member states. So inherent, inalienable rights of all member states of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So freedom, justice, and peace. The basic things that leads to freedom, justice, and peace is the recognition of inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights. So you have to remember freedom, justice, peace, inherent and inalienable. So remember inherent, just the fact that you are being born, you have those rights. Then inalienable means something that cannot be taken away from you. So here you have to understand what the word dignity means, because inherent dignity, so the word dignity actually means the quality of being worthy or honorable. For dignity to be inherent to all men and women means for it to be fixed to each individual. So it's fixed, it's something that cannot be changed. So no wonder we say inherent dignity, worthy, quality of worthy or honorable, something that's fixed for every human being. Then here, inalienable means impossible to take away. So impossible to take away or give up. Inalienable, we hold these trusts to be self-evident that all men and all men or all individuals are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain and inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so this is what I was saying here, that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's not legally binding because of the sovereign nature. So it's actually taken into consideration as a customary international law, so something that has been accepted, culturally accepted, universally accepted by all member states of the United Nations, but because of the principle of sovereignty, it's not necessarily legally binding to all individual states. So we have to talk about certain characteristics of human rights. These you have to know. Characteristics of human rights you have to know for your exams. I'm warning you, so please pay particular attention. So human rights have distinguishing features or traits or characteristics that set them apart from ordinary rights. And these include the inherent nature of human rights that I've just been explaining here. Human rights are inherent. This means they are inborn and are our birthright. Actually, human rights can actually go beyond birth, like before birth. No wonder we have got certain pro-rights movement and debates on abortion and what makes a definition of life? What's the definition of a human life? So actually your human rights can actually be protected before you are actually even born. No wonder, like I said, human rights as a topic, it's vast, it's subject to debate, it's not something that is static, it's ever changing. So this word inherent, inborn, and our birthright can actually be before birth. So we are born with them. They cannot be transferred from one person to another. They exist as natural and permanent part of human beings until the time one dies. Actually, now we have posthumous rights. No wonder wills exist. Whether one knows them or not, they still exist, and they cannot be bought, given, entrusted, or aimed. However, human rights can only be violated or denied, but never taken away. So inherent means you're born with them. They can't be taken away. You're a human being, you have those rights. Whether you recognize them or not, you still have them. So human rights are inalienable or inseparable, cannot be separated, cannot be taken away, cannot be distinguished by any means. So this means human rights cannot be separated or taken away or given away. Even when human rights are actually being violated and the laws of the country are not followed by leaders, let's say in a dictatorship sort of situation, people still have their rights. Human rights cannot be grabbed, even if the owner is not aware of them, because they are natural and legal and lawful entitlements of all members of different societies. So please remember, inalienable means cannot be taken away or given away. So human rights are universal in nature, or they are ambiguous in nature. So all human beings enjoy these freedoms. Universal means they are followed and applied by all people in the world. So ambiguous in nature, regardless of your race, sex, ethnicity, religion, political, national, or social status. Human rights are indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. So the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of its individual parts. It means every single piece that forms human rights can stand independently, and it all has equal importance. So no right is greater than any other right. So all rights are equally important and cannot be divided or subtracted or removed from others. They are not mutually exclusive. They come together to actually form a whole, a greater whole that cannot be taken away. There is no ranking of these rights, for all are equal. Hence, all rights should be enjoyed in totality as a whole. That's what I'm from saying. For example, one cannot be denied the rights to food, clothes, medical care, or shelter, then be granted only one right to life. It wouldn't make sense. Such a person cannot enjoy full fundamental human rights. Thus, the right to life is dependent and related to the right to food, clothes, medical care, and these rights cannot be divided. One needs all rights to live full. If one is denied the right to education, that person is likely to never fulfill their potential. So this is all the things that I was trying to explain. So back to our first definition that I showed you from the United Nations page, we now have to know how to categorize human rights. So international human rights have been categorized into the first category, which is also called first generational rights, which are civil and political rights. Then we have second generation, which is economic, social, and cultural rights. And we have got third generational rights that actually help enhance first and second generational rights, which are called collective rights. So these rights were classified into three categories, and these categories are known as generations. And these generations are put according to their historical development of human rights. And remember, the basics is life. So civil and political rights are also called first generational rights because they were the first rights to be recognized, obviously. These rights stress the freedom of the individual and urges government not to interfere in the life of an individual. For example, in our Constitution of 1966, civil and political rights were found in Part 3, and they include the basics: the right to life, the right to personal liberty, protection from slavery or forced labor, freedom from torture and inhuman treatment, freedom of opinion, protection of freedom of consequence. We have to know these examples: protection of freedom of expression, protection of freedom of assembly and association, protection of freedom of movement, protection from discrimination on grounds of race, age, sex, ethnicity, religion, among others. So these are the civil and political rights. The basic characteristics, please, you have to know these categories and be able to give good examples under these categories. So economic, social, and cultural rights. These are also called second generational rights and consists of rights that are, economic, social, and, cultural in nature. So they bring about social justice, dignity, and equality when government creates good conditions to allow enjoyment of these rights. And good example, food, employment, social security, education, health, medical care, clean environment, development, and adequate housing. So after the basics, what do you need? Second generational rights like food, employment, social security, education, healthcare, clean environment. So these are the basics. These come after the basics. Then you have things called collective rights. So these are also called third generation rights. And like I said, they are more recently defined, and it's actually the collective rights that are rapidly evolving and rapidly changing rights that have an influence on first and second generational rights. So collective rights refer to those rights of people to be protected from attacks on their interests and identity. The most important collective rights is the right to self-determination. So as an individual, how are you defining yourself? You define your own life, the way you want to live your life, the way you want to control your destiny in line with moral principles, as long as it doesn't affect other people's lives. You have that right to self-determination. These rights are expressed in documents of international law. They include, for example, the Stockholm Declaration of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. So now the human environment, climate change, the 1992 Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, and other soft laws. So soft laws, they have not been enacted into legally binding documents as usual. It is hard to enact soft laws because the principle of sovereignty, like I said, sovereignty is a problem. These rights are best described as solidarity rights, for they need international cooperation and aim at community building. Collective rights include right to self-determination, economic and social development, a health environment, natural resources, participation in cultural heritage, and the right to international equity, not equality, but equity, meaning fairness for all, and sustainability. These rights, though not legally binding, meaning they create a framework for the enjoyment of other rights, meaning collective rights are actually a strong part that help our first and second generational rights. And these collective rights, their rights are ever changing. So things like gender identity, LGBT movements, these are things that actually fall in these collective rights, and they are all subject to debate because they are not legally binding, but they are changing the moral landscape that the world is living, that the world we're living in. Like, for example, if these collective rights were actually not enacted or not into existence, women wouldn't be, even have the right to vote. So these rights are very important as they change the moral landscape and make the world a better place for everyone in line with ethical principles, of course. So significance of human rights. So human rights focus on the dignity. Remember, dignity, honor, respect, and self-esteem an individual is entitled to of the human beings. Thus, each individual needs to develop certain attitudes to promote human rights. These are respect for everyone's life, the basics, their physical, their mental integrity, freedom, property, and privacy. Respect for differences in sex, ethnicity, language, color, age, religion, cultural aspects, opinion, and identity of others of their own. Taking up responsibility in society for rights come with possibilities. Every right comes with a specific responsibility, such as respecting others, respecting other people's rights, for they are protected by the law and guaranteed by international standards. Recognizing accountability and responsibility in the relationship between the individual, institution, or state. And also rights holders have to be empowered so as to claim and take part in public decision making. So empowerment includes giving knowledge and skills they need to make claims of their rights. So it all goes back to civic education. If you are knowledgeable about the political landscape of the state that you are in, you are empowered. So this also leads to participation of both sexes and all ages is an important human right in all areas of their lives. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you should actually know at least even 10 or certain aspects of what this declaration is all about. So there are 30 articles which are agreed upon by the representatives of the United Nations member states with different populations and political systems. They include the following. So this is the gold standard that each country has to uphold in treating human rights for its individual citizens living in that state or country. Know this, it's important. Everyone is free and we should all be treated in the same way. Everyone is equal despite differences in skin color, sex, religion, or language. Everyone has the right to life, the basic, and to live in freedom and safety. No one has the right to treat you as a slave, nor should you make anyone your slave. No one has the right to hate you or torture you. Everyone has the right to be treated equally. The law is the same for everyone. It should be applied in the same way to all, the rule of law. Everyone has the right to ask for legal help when their rights are not respected. So we all need a legal representation, whether you are rich or poor. No one has the right to imprison you unjustly or expel you from your own country. Everyone has the right to fair and public trial. Everyone should be considered innocent until proven guilty. We all have the right to privacy and protection. Everyone has the right to travel as they wish. Everyone has the right to go to another country and ask for protection if they are being persecuted. So these are all articles that you have to know under the United Nations Declaration for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I don't know why I always call it the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So to actually sum up everything, remember human rights, inherent. Human rights are inalienable to every human being. Human rights cannot be divided or separated. Human rights do not exist independently. They all have to come together for them to actually make sense. So please remember all these principles. Please revise those past paper questions on human rights that I sent. This has been Brainworks Education. Please study. Thank you for your continued support. I will see you in the next lecture video for civic education. Study hard.